Our fourth and final presentation of the evening and 12th overall is Miss Elise Mason, Abortion, Rethinking a Christian Perspective.
Freedom is the recognition that no single person, no single authority or government has a monopoly on the truth, but that every individual life is infinitely precious. Every one of us put on this world was put there for a reason and has something to offer. This quote by Ronald Reagan would not be considered very popular in our culture today, as propaganda is held up as truth, and human life is increasingly devalued and even discarded with ease. When I was 10 years old, this secular worldview became something much more real to me. My mom, while pregnant with my little brother Micah, was told that he had a severe birth defect, where the left side of his heart is so underdeveloped that it cannot pump blood to the rest of the body. And without the advancements in science and medicine we have today, he only would have survived a few days. When Micah was still in the womb, my parents were urged by several doctors and specialists to have an abortion. They were warned that not only would it be a long and difficult journey, but that Micah would likely live a very poor quality of life. The easier and more practical option would be to eliminate the pregnancy and try again. My parents chose to do everything they could to protect the life that God had given to Micah. Before the age of 3, my brother had 3 open-heart surgeries to bypass the poorly functioning left side of his heart and reconstruct his circulation so that the right ventricle can complete the job that the left ventricle was supposed to do. Today, at age 7, Micah is a living testimony to the value of babies in the womb. God has blessed not only him, but our whole family through Micah. His story is an example to the world of God's sovereign power. God often allows us to experience hardships, but these are used not only to strengthen our relationship with him, but also to be a light to those around us of the work that he is doing in our lives. Micah's suffering brought believers together in prayer. People were able to see the testimony of faith and God's goodness in his answer to prayer. Because of our family's own experience, we were able to reach out to others struggling through similar trials and give them support. Abortion, though seen as a convenient solution to the doctors, would have taken away not only Micah's precious life, but his amazing testimony. This shows us that as difficult as it may be to see, God's plan is best. He is still working in incredible ways through Micah. Romans 9:20 says, "But who are you, O man, to answer back to God? Will what his molded say to his molder, 'Why have you made me like this?' As sinful, dependent humans, who are we to question the ways of the Lord?" Instead of turning from God, we should surrender ourselves to his will and rest in his plan for our lives. Because of our sinful nature, we often desire to be in control of our lives and do what brings us the most ease and contentment. This world has not only justified sin, but every day it is encouraging us to embrace it. As Christians, it is important to understand this secular worldview and recognize how it causes even Christians to end up justifying abortion. A biblical worldview can clearly show that abortion is unethical through an appeal to reason, science, and morality. How has abortion become so widely accepted? The radical ideas of the 1960s greatly desensitized the culture to the disturbing reality of abortion. This was the era of sexual revolution and feminism. These two social movements were the most influential to women and their views on abortion. Betty Friedan, a key influencer in this era, helped shape women's views on feminism. Her book, The Feminine Mystique, taught that women should not conform to their roles as housewives, but should instead strive for equality with men. Her main point that altered the culture's perception of abortion was that women should be free to enjoy sexual relationships without bearing the responsibility of having children. This was her definition of equality with men, that both should be free from the burden of children. These new ideas led people to believe that abortion is the lesser of two evils, that abortion is a tool that can allow true equality with men. To fully grasp the abortion argument, we must first understand the philosophical definition of personhood that is the foundation of our ideas about human life. A biblical perspective of personhood is that mankind is unique from other living organisms. They possess a soul and a conscience. During creation, God breathed the breath of life into Adam. He created him with a soul that will never die. This distinguishes mankind from animals in that they are made in God's image. The soul allows each individual to have a personal relationship with God. Christ paid the full penalty for man's sin on the cross, so that instead of death, mankind can have the hope of eternal life with God. If we are made in God's image and are redeemable, then our life is extremely valuable. C.S. Lewis said in his sermon, "The Weight of Glory," "There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal." Lewis recognizes that we are not merely living organisms, but have value in Christ. Each one of us has a heavenly purpose to extol him on this earth. Treating others with respect is necessary because ultimately they are valuable to God and have an eternal purpose. Additionally, mankind is set apart and that God created them with a conscience that allows them to know right from wrong. What exactly is the conscience? It is said that through our individual conscience, we become aware of our deeply held moral principles. We are motivated to act upon them, and we assess our character, our behavior, and ultimately ourself against those principles. But where did these principles come from? This set of moral principles is man's inner knowledge of God, their creator. God is perfectly holy and is incapable of sinning. Because we are made in his image, we also possess his attributes of order and reason. He created us with the knowledge of what is right and wrong. We know in our hearts that we will be judged for how we act. Romans 2:14 makes it clear that God's law is written on each individual's heart. Even if we suppress the truth, we know and feel the weight of our sin. Because our nature is corrupt, we desire to be free from God's law so we can sin without consequence. However, our conscience is a constant reminder that God holds the authority over humanity and is the final judge. So we see that from a Christian perspective, we are created by God with both body and soul. Our physical body reveals our personal identity, and because we are part of God's creation, we all have a unique purpose. However, the prevalent worldview in our culture today is a secular one. This secular view is a dualistic view that separates body and soul. Dualism originated in ancient Greece from the philosopher Plato, who believed that the soul controls the body. This idea continued to develop in the 17th century through the French philosopher René Descartes. Descartes put the body in one realm and the mind in another. He claimed that the mind controlled the body. Descartes uttered the famous quote, "I think, therefore I am." This quote conveys the idea that our bodies are like a machine that is controlled by the desires of our minds. Therefore, if an individual cannot make moral judgments, then their life is expendable. Then they have not achieved personhood, and their life is expendable. With this perspective, one can logically support abortion without any ramifications. This assumption has reduced the body to the subpersonal, functioning solely on the levels of biology and chemistry. This is a philosophical foundation that allows people to justify abortion. The baby in the womb, although scientifically a living human being, is not yet a person and therefore has no moral status. The obvious question that follows is, when does a human gain personhood? The problem is, to choose a stage of development or qualification that determines personhood would be completely subjective. Each person could create their own list of characteristics needed for one to qualify as a person, but this would be solely based on what they value the most. From a Christian worldview, personhood is not about what they can do, but who they are. They're created by a God who knows and loves them. They are created in his image, giving them value that cannot be taken away. The primary argument surrounding the abortion debate used to revolve around determining if the fetus was a human life. Today, there is no question that life begins at conception when looking at the basic human embryological facts. During fertilization, the sperm and the ovum, which each have 23 chromosomes, only possess the capability to create life. But together, they cease to exist as they were and become a single-cell embryonic human zygote. However, this fact is not enough to convince people that life inside the womb should be protected. People can believe that life begins at conception and still support abortion because they make a distinction between human life and personhood. They claim that even if the baby in the womb is alive, it is not yet a person. This is the dualistic view of a human being. To them, the body may be alive, but the mind is not yet developed enough for them to qualify as a human person with individual rights. With this thinking, it leads to the justification of post-birth abortions, which are really just infanticide. Nancy Pearcey clearly explains the danger of this in her book, Love Thy Body. She says, America is heading in the same direction as the Nazis in Germany. The Nazis did not begin by killing Jews. They first used their gas chambers to kill the handicapped. And this movement was led by the medical profession. Doctors urged that the lives of disabled people were not worth living. Disturbingly, a 2000 article uses exactly the same phrase, arguing that afterbirth abortion should be permitted for infants whose lives are not worth living. This is the sickening reality that occurs when the true definitions of human life and personhood are altered. Abortion displays man's wickedness and rejection of God's authority. God holds all authority over life. In 1 Samuel 1, the Lord closed Hannah's womb and she was not able to conceive. Because of her trust, he granted her the ability to have a son in his timing. No conception occurs that is not from God's creative purpose. However, in the world today, society disregards God's sovereignty and attempts to take control of their own lives. This stems from postmodern philosophy, which is the belief that there is no absolute truth and each individual can create their own moral standards. This allows mankind to feel autonomous instead of humbly submitting to God's law. Augustine, in his book The Confessions, states, "Without you, what am I to myself but a guide to my own self-destruction?" Mankind's attempt to rule over their own life never results in true joy, but only in destruction and grief. One work of literature that I've studied in high school highlights these truths. Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein is the perfect example of how one's selfish ambition and desire for autonomy can lead to destruction. Victor Frankenstein's interest in science and his desire for fame drive him to complete a daunting task, the creation of life itself. His ambition and pride blind him from the consequences of creating life. Frankenstein takes God's role as creator. Because he is a sinful and corrupt man, his creation is also sinful and corrupt. Instead of creating something beautiful that is worthy of admiration, he is left with a monster that only brings destruction. This novel is a warning that mankind can never aim to be like God. Just like Frankenstein's attempt to usurp God's creative role, our culture attempts to have sovereign control over the most basic right, the right to life. 100 babies are murdered by abortion in the United States every hour. This is a statistic that is easy to dismiss without really thinking about. But when I hear 100 babies an hour, I think of the magnitude of how God is using just one life, the life of my brother Micah. It is unimaginable to think of how God could have worked in all of those babies' lives if it were not for the sin of abortion. This is something that Christians cannot be desensitized to. Christians must be prepared to answer the world with wisdom and truth. It is Christ who offers himself as a solution to a broken and sinful world through his sacrificial death on the cross. Today, Christians are often tempted to avoid controversy, but John 15:18-19 says, "If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you." This is an important time for Christians to stand up for what is true and be vocal about what needs to change. It is important to donate to pro-life causes, vote for pro-life candidates, and pray that hearts will turn to God and people will see the truth about abortion. However, the only way to truly change people's minds is to address the underlying reasons for how society has come to justify abortion. By understanding the secular mindset, one that has embraced a dualistic view of personhood, only by exposing this error in thinking can we point to the truth that each individual is created a complete person that is valued and loved by God. Thank you.